Welcome back to the Marketplace. It is your home of free agency here in the NBL as we build towards the following season. Every single day is a new adventure right now, and we have got a lot to get through on today's show. And a special part of today's show is fan questions. We put it out on all of the NBL social media channels to ask the panel some questions that you have about NBL free agency, and we will get to those very, very soon. I'm Jack Heverin, joined online here on screen by the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball, Olgun Uluc. And Olgun, it's been a couple of days since the Matthew Dellavedova decision. How's the fallout been, do you think?
Yeah, it's been interesting. You have a lot of people looking at the Sydney Kings and, why do they keep getting players like this? And then, you turn your attention to the other teams and it's really easy for them to just quickly pivot to the next thing. It's easy to replace not getting a marquee like Matthew Dellavedova because then you just pivot to getting an import. So it hasn't really affected those other teams too much as far as their direction. But, Delhi to Sydney, you look at just the star power in Sydney right now, and I think that's the thing that a lot of eyes are looking at right now.
And Pete Hooley, great to have you. You're across everything that's going on here in the league. I guess the secondary part to the Matthew Dellavedova thing is, my mind went to Perth straight away, and my mind also went to Brisbane about what they will do next and what they're thinking next.
Yeah, Olgun's spot on, right? You don't have time to just sit and be like, we missed out on a key marquee piece. You've got to go and figure out the next name on your whiteboard or plan B, C, and understand where do we need to pivot to. There's some big names still out there, and from a Perth Wildcats perspective in particular, I think one thing they're going to have to realise is they're probably going to have to overpay to get some sort of marquee. We mentioned it, Olgun, in the last couple of marketplaces that they need to have a marquee signing to go with the imports. If they bring back Dylan Windler, Doolittle's there, you can still get another very high-level import. But it all probably, I don't want to say means nothing, but it means very little if they don't go and get that marquee. So we'll talk about that as well.
And a couple of official announcements since the last time you two caught up on Monday on Marketplace. And you were both across this one from the start, is Flynn Cameron. Pete, 3-year deal at the Adelaide 36ers. You spoke about it last episode. Amazing opportunity for this young man.
It is, and again, as Olgun said, it was more for the Adelaide 36ers. How do we get him in the door? This is a young guy whose ceiling is through the roof. Like, we have not seen anywhere near the prime and best of Flynn Cameron. To develop more in the league, I think he's going to be playing a bit more of that wing spot, that 3-and-D type player, but his evolution is going to be huge. And now they've got him in the door. They can build around him. They've got the local superstars with DJ Vasiljevic and Isaac Humphries. They've brought back some key local places on the bench and South Australian talent. So really, really positive start to free agency from the Adelaide 36ers.
And Olgun, one of the other major signings the last couple of days that is now official is Nick Marshall to the Tasmania JackJumpers on a multi-year deal. Again, something that you two spoke about on Monday before it became official. It's really interesting to see how Nick Marshall will thrive, I reckon, under Scott Roth.
Yeah, and it's similar to the Flynn Cameron to Adelaide thing where he was just wasn't where he was going to get all the reps and the minutes to develop in the way that I think we all want to see them. And so you have Nick Marshall getting a fresh start in Tasmania. They have a program that they've proven they can develop guys. Obviously, you look at Jack McVeigh, Sean McDonald, some of these guys. So Nick Marshall goes into there, and we talk about someone's ceiling, but until they eventuate it, they're just a regular NBL player. So this is probably Nick Marshall's best chance in his career to get to that ceiling that I think a lot of people see.
Some of your fan questions coming up very shortly. It will surprise no one that there's a lot of questions from Perth Wildcats fans and also quite a few from Melbourne United fans as well. So we'll get to them very shortly. But Olgun, we're going to start with coaching news today, which is not always what we do here on the Marketplace, but it's a new era for the New Zealand Breakers. They've made no secrets about that whatsoever, that they want to get back to their roots. They want some stability with this franchise and this organisation, and that includes Petteri Koponen.
Yeah, so when the new ownership came in, there was a clear out of the entire front office staff. And technically, a coach's contract doesn't sit on the salary cap. They're just employed by the organization, by a private company. And so Petteri Koponen, it was a decision that they had to make. Do we keep him? And I think when they speak to the players, there's a lot of goodwill among those players in Petteri Koponen. They really liked what he brought to the table. Yes, he was a first-time head coach, but I think they liked his demeanor. I think they liked the sets he ran. They liked that entire coaching staff. So it's not a complete surprise that they brought him back. And I think from Petteri Koponen's perspective, I'd like to see a bit more stability in this franchise, and the new ownership does that. The direction helps that, and I think it's more palatable for him to stay there as well. He was one who we thought maybe will he find a new home, but I think with the stability there, with what the New Zealand Breakers new ownership heard from their players, it makes sense for them to have brought him back.
Geez, he would have been stiff to miss out on coming back for another year, especially with everything that transpired. Look, this is a team that was currently second at the FIBA break. before everything went down with all the moves with Freddie Gillespie, Taco Fall, and what transpired after that, they were second, rolling along nicely. I spoke to a lot of players. They do love Petteri Koponen. You understand, he's got that playing mindset. He's fresh out of the game. Now he gets probably a full season to really have more of an impact of what he can achieve throughout the entire length of that year. So glad that he's going to run it back. I think that's a really key piece. And I really thought that if he wasn't going to be back on the New Zealand sideline, it would be more of his decision rather than what anyone else could do from an organisational point of view.
So in line with everything that we've just spoken about, you two, stability being the key word here, undoubtedly, and the most important thing. Does it change anything with Parker Jackson-Cartwright? Last week on Marketplace Live, we spoke about him being a prime target. We almost walked past the fact that New Zealand were his current team here in the NBL. Could things change a little bit now for him and for that organisation?
Yeah, look, we saw some situations last season where it almost gets to a point of no return. And Parker Jackson-Cartwright is a smart guy. He also has interest from around the league too. So it feels like maybe the writing was on the wall at the end of the season, even though there is this new shift in ownership and stability at the team. It just feels like the breakup was slightly messy, just given the end of the Breakers season. So I don't know if I see Parker Jackson-Cartwright back in New Zealand, but there will be other teams around the league who show interest in him when it's time for him to sign a contract.
There's definitely other teams who are interested, but I tell you what, I was under the assumption the same thing as everybody when we saw the frustration at the back end of last year. We know he got suspended for a key period of time, but since the new change in ownership and the new restructure getting back to the roots, some of the things that I have heard out there is that he is more open now to returning to the New Zealand Breakers. And that's talking to a couple of players around the situation, all of that. It's clear that he would like to be in the NBL just based on some of the whispers. I know that he's playing overseas now, and if he ended up signing overseas in the future, that would make sense too. He's a terrific talent. But with other teams interested, the old change in the Breakers, I wouldn't be shocked at all if he ended up back in New Zealand, because it does seem like, hey, this is kind of a fresh start for everybody, albeit they've obviously got some key guys already returning and the head coach.
From a Breakers point of view, while we're talking about them, Olgun, that part of the connection piece is getting more New Zealand players back into the lineup, and that includes Reuben Te Rangi on a 2-year deal.
Reuben Te Rangi on a 2-year deal. We reported the other day Isaiah Liafa on a 2-year deal. They missed on Flynn Cameron, but again, we look at teams' behaviours instead of what they talk about, right? This team has been talking about bringing New Zealand talent in, and they haven't necessarily done that. This time they are doing that. And, Isaiah Liafa had a down year in Sydney, but I think a lot of people around the league still see the 3-and-D threat that he brings to the table. Reuben Te Rangi had glimpses with the JackJumpers last season, so these are two New Zealanders locked in on multi-year deals, and then the hope is that they can rebound from some of their poor form that over the past 12 months and sort of get to that point that they've shown that they can be in the NBL. These are two guys who have proven that they can make an impact on winning teams in the NBL.
The Reuben Te Rangi one's big for me because I really do think that a lot of his inconsistencies in the NBL have come between the years. And in terms of getting into a situation that perhaps is not the best for him in terms of fighting for rotational position minutes and all of that, he gets to go home now. He understands that they're trying to bring back that local core. He'll be feeling really, really positive, really happy to be back in New Zealand. And I think we're going to see the best of Reuben Te Rangi.
So also available from a New Zealand perspective was Shea Ili, but the likelihood of Shea ever leaving Melbourne United, Pete, was pretty low, and he's re-signed on a 2-year deal.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, they were the whispers for a very long time. And again, I spoke about it a bit throughout the coverage of the course of the year, that talking to GMs, talking to coaches, if you take out the names of the Bryce Cottons, the Chris Goldings, the Xavier Cooks, and ask any other team who they'd want to sign first, Shea Ili's the first name that pops up because he's a winner. He does all of those little things that go towards winning. He's the best defender in the league. He's back-to-back Best Defensive Player of the Year award winner. We understand what he's capable of achieving offensively now. He's unlocked that. He's got a confidence there. But he's just a no-fuss guy, just goes about his business. So Melbourne United get to lock him in, and now they start to piece around some key pieces. Only 4 guys currently who were there last season locked in to run it back, with Dash Daniels being their 5th signing to go ahead next year. A lot of gaps to fill, but it's obviously a good start.
And I guess, Olgun, isn't it great from a Shea Ili perspective that this time last year we were asking questions about his longevity in the game with concussion issues and whether Shea could get through a full season, whether Shea could see out the end of his career. It certainly seems, touch wood, that those things are behind him.
Yeah, I think, Jack, you look at the past couple seasons, and when Shea Ili is healthy, Melbourne United wins. Even the season where they missed the playoffs a couple seasons ago, the season where they had Rajon Tucker and Xavier Rattan-Mays, Shea Ili was injured for a lot of that season, and when he was healthy, they were maybe the best team in the league. So I think the value, I think we all appreciate, and Melbourne United definitely appreciates. I think a lot of people see this as sort of United wasn't able to retain Delhi, and so they pivoted and kept Shea Ili. This deal was agreed to months ago. This deal was effectively done, and I think they just wanted to get through the Delhi piece before they officially announced it and put it in writing. But this was something that there was no world where in the immediate future Dean Vickerman and Shea Ili would have split. They are a match made in heaven from a coaching and player standpoint, and so this was inevitable. There was no chance that any other team was going to scoop Shea Ili out of Melbourne.
Yeah, Olga's spot on, but it also makes the point, you talk about the questions around his longevity, the concussion concerns, but building out the roster, Melbourne United have to understand, they have to think about the other pieces they put. They do have to prepare for a world where if he does get another knock and miss his time, we have to have someone slot into more minutes at the starting point guard role. It's not going to be Dash Daniels being able to play 35 minutes next year if Shea Ili's not available. It's the harsh reality of it. One, you want Shea Ili there all season, and hopefully, like we saw this year, the majority of it got through and was at his damaging best. But if he's not, if something happens, as you said, touch wood, we have to, whoever we sign as that import two, be able to handle the rock a little bit more, or whoever our backup one is with Flynn Cameron and Delhi not there, has to be able to handle a lot more expectation.
Great news for Shea, great news for Melbourne United. We'll get to them in fan questions very shortly as well. Todd Blanchfield is a fantastic story. I'm not sure, Olgun and Pete, halfway through the year, we would have been having this conversation about Todd Blanchfield being re-signed, but forget Botox, forget the fountain of youth. Whatever Todd Blanchfield has done in the second half of the season has worked, because not only is he now a championship winner after 400 plus games, he's got a 3-year deal.
And the Illawarra Hawks had a couple of guys who stepped up late in their championship run. It was Todd Blanchfield, it was Dan Greeter, and these guys have now been rewarded with contracts for more seasons. And Todd Blanchfield, he's 33, he'll be turning 34 at the close to the start of next season. So this contract carries him through to effectively his 37th birthday. And I think the way he plays, I don't think the Hawks had any issues as far as the impact he can bring. He's a sharpshooter. He's a no-leave guy. So I don't think the Hawks had an issue with that. I'm surprised it was 3 years. It's just a lot of years to give a guy like that, especially because there were some whispers that they were negotiating. They were going back and forth. But I think with Todd Blanchfield playing NBL 1, in Illawarra, it just felt inevitable that a deal would get done. And it feels like, again, we probably wouldn't rule out this guy playing until he's 40, but it feels like he'll be finishing his career in Illawarra.
And it makes sense. And again, to have those veteran pieces locked in. So again, you expect that his role by his 37th birthday might not be as big as it has been this year. But to have him there around the group, the culture, to understand, hey, what we did to win a championship back in NBL 25, this is what the level we have to get back to, that's invaluable as well. But it also just proves how important sometimes a change of scenery is for players. He signed a big multi-year deal with the Perth Wildcats. It just didn't sit right. It just wasn't the right fit for him. They managed to negotiate out of that, and he gets to Illawarra, and he's playing some of his best basketball. Just
a couple of quick ones before we get to the fan questions, Olgun. One around Akech Aliir. The option wasn't taken by Melbourne United, so he's available right now.
So no, he's not, Jack. He has agreed to a deal with the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. So the Phoenix were a team that were really high on Fabijan Krslovic. That didn't happen for them, and so they pivoted really quickly and got to Akech Aliir. And when you look, it's something that I'm speaking to teams about a lot over the past few days is what backup big men are there on the market. And someone like Akech Aliir is someone who caught the eye of the Phoenix. And I was around Melbourne a lot during last preseason, and I'd go to a ton of practices, and I'd see Akech Aliir look like a damn good player in all of those practices. And Dean Vickerman would walk off the court, and he'd say, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think Akech Aliir is a very real player." He effectively earned that last roster spot in United, and so he is a high quality big. There is a skill set there that I think a lot of teams want to tap into. And when you think of backup bigs in the NBL, Akech Aliir was one of the best available, and the Phoenix snapped him up.
And what you all just saw here on Marketplace was a prime example of Olgun keeping his cards close to his chest, Pete. Just said, ask me about Akech Aliir. Didn't tell me that he'd signed.
Well, I mean, it'd be a big get for the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, wouldn't it? Because they've been desperate for a backup big. And again, from his standpoint, personal for Aliir, he was never actually going to play meaningful minutes for Melbourne United. As Olgun said, he had to get that last roster spot. You had Marcus Lee, you had Rob Lowe, albeit when there was injuries or there's foul trouble, he played a bit more. But the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, we kept talking about it all last year. Who's going to back up Geordie Hunter? He's going to get the opportunity, continue to work, and as we said, we've seen small little glimpses. Josh King gets a nice blank canvas to work with.
And lastly, Olgun, Fabijan Krslovic. His name actually came through a lot on the fan question, so we pulled him out of the questions to ask you directly because he seems like he's in demand right now.
Yeah, like I said, getting a quality backup big is really difficult in the NBL these days. And you look at someone like Fabijan Krslovic, who has played a key role in the JackJumpers' success over the past few seasons. Every time Will Magnay has gone down, Krslovic is there to pick up the slack. He is just the most solid player you could ever ask for. Defensively, he's always in the right spots. Offensively, you look back to Game 5 of last season's championship series, and he just hits those big shots too. So he is a solid player, and there are a ton of teams interested in him. I know the Brisbane Bullets were a team that asked the question. Melbourne United is a team that absolutely asked the question. The Phoenix were involved as well. So he all of a sudden, as soon as the big dominoes fell, Krslovic became one of the hottest targets because he's extremely, extremely reliable.
Let's get to fan questions. So, big thanks to everyone for sending them through via Instagram. You can follow the NBL again, stay up to date with all the latest as it happens across free agency. More than 250 questions that have come through in the last 24 hours. We've had to filter our way through them. And to be honest, we probably could have done a very special Perth Wildcats episode. The Red Army are desperate to get information of what is going on with their team right now. So let's start with this one from Hoot West. First question, which is timely given the tweet in the last 24 hours. Are there rumours true of Montrezl Harrell and the Perth Wildcats potentially getting together, Olgun?
Are there rumours of that? I haven't even seen rumours of that, and unfortunately, I don't think that's reality. Montrezl Harrell is not someone the Perth Wildcats are going after. As far as that big spot, the Perth Wildcats have their eye on marquees. So unfortunately, it's not. There's really no interest around the NBL in Montrezl Harrell. At least I haven't heard it at this point. Montrezl Harrell has obviously signalled that he'd like to return to the NBL. It won't be in Adelaide, and from what I understand, there aren't teams around the league who are interested. And you look around the league and you see why. There are a lot of high-level local bigs that are locked in already. So as far as starting 5 spots, those just don't exist. And I don't think any NBL team in 2025 sees Montrezl Harrell as a 4-man, and so there just aren't spots for him in the NBL right now.
What did the tweet mean, Pete? You're younger and cooler than me. I don't speak Montrez. What did that tweet actually mean?
No, I think he's referring to the fact he's like, clearly they don't want me back if everyone's free agency and that he hasn't signed yet or hasn't been linked to a club. I hadn't heard the rumours with the Perth Wildcats either. I think a lot of people, we keep talking about the Wildcats war chest, how much money they have available, how blank their roster is right now. Some people might have tried to say, hey, well, this fits, people tweeting at him. But Olgun's right. You talk about where everyone else is at with their roster. He's a 5-man. We saw him play in the 4, and a bigger 4-man for the Adelaide 36ers. Everyone else largely has 5 spots already locked up. They have got Doolittle there. Seems like the marquee 5-man is exactly what the Perth Wildcats are going to go after. If that all falls through, then maybe that is the world where they have to pivot and say, you know what, we're going to have to try and find some sort of marquee point guard again. We missed out on Delhi, and then go after an import 5. So potentially, if those are the rumours, that you can get down later in the path, but it definitely doesn't seem anything near future going to happen.
It might dovetail nicely into the next question from Sam. I know you've both got information on this one. What is the latest with Jo Lual-Acuil and a return to the NBL?
Well, from what I understand, the Perth Wildcats have reached out about Jo Lual-Acuil Jr. and as far as potentially joining their team. They've also reached out to Yanni Wetzell. So we've spoken, I think, a lot now as far as the Perth Wildcats needing to lock in a marquee player. They missed out on Matthew Dellavedova. They need to get the next marquee player on the market. And when it comes to the fit on their roster, when you have Christian Doolittle as that starting 4-man, you can see them going and getting a 5. And JLA and Yanni Wetzell are 2 names who they have engaged in conversation. But as Pete mentioned, they're in a situation where they have no leverage. The leverage is almost entirely with the player at this point, because the player knows that the Perth Wildcats need a marquee. And so if you're JLA, for example, and let's say your market at one point in your career in the NBL was 600,000, well, you can go and ask for 800,000 or 900,000, and the Perth Wildcats almost have no choice but to pay that because of how desperate they are for a marquee right now. And so those are the names they're going after, but the leverage, unfortunately for the Wildcats, is entirely with the players.
Yeah, spot on. And again, heard similar things. But the JLA one, he's playing very well overseas now. He's enjoying his time there, it seems. So he'll get those opportunities again pop up with some European or Asian offers for next year as well. We know that obviously he loves to be in Melbourne, had success with Melbourne United, understands the program there. They need a marquee or import big man as well. So he'll potentially pop up there. Won't be cheap. But again, I do think like the Wildcats are in a position where, hey, what's it going to take? You kind of give us, as Olgun said, give us a figure that we can work with. We need to try and make a splash because it's going to have to be in that marquee 5 spot with Keanu Pinder not coming back.
Question from Simba. This name has been mentioned already, but what are the latest with Yanni Wetzell and also Will McDowell-White?
So Yanni Wetzell, there are teams around the league who are reaching out, right? They're interested. The Will McDowell-White one, it feels like the opposite. Teams reach out, and I think his camp is flagging that a return to the NBL is not likely for this coming season. Beyond that, we'll wait and see. I think it's more likely we see McDowell-White back in the NBL for NBL 27 than NBL 26. But I think in the same vein as Jo Lual-Acuil Jr. doing really well in Manissa right now and getting a ton of offers from EuroLeague teams and high-level European teams that just have money that can dwarf what NBL teams have to offer. It's a similar situation with Will McDowell-White in Alba, where he is playing at the level where there are a lot of European teams who are willing to pay up for him. He also has a team option with Alba Berlin, and so that we have to wait and see what happens there. But notwithstanding that team option, it does feel like Will McDowell will spend at least one more season in Europe before coming back to the NBL.
And yeah, teams definitely have been very interested in Yanni Wetzell. Why wouldn't you? If you haven't seen his stats or the way he's been playing recently, they're on the same team, obviously playing in Germany.
He looks fit, doesn't he?
He's playing some exceptional basketball. But again, there's Melbourne United, another one who need that kind of big. Can you go out there and try and make it happen? It's going to cost you a lot of money, but to try and bring him back and maybe, again, we like to throw out hypotheticals, but maybe that's if the Perth Wildcats are really struggling to kind of find those dynamic pieces, maybe that's a package deal. You say, hey, we just go and get 2 marquees and bookend our starting 5 with Will McDowell-White and Yanni Wetzell, just bring them over from Berlin, but there's that team option as well. So big things to play out. It'd be great to have them back. It sounds like it might happen eventually. Unsure if it'll be NBL 26, but hey, you never know.
We know Mark Arena watches this show, so there's just a little bit of advice for you, Mark, and for the Perth Wildcats from a future GM in Pete Hooley. This one from Lachlan Marnie is a name we haven't spoken about a lot, but it probably is about time that we start talking about Milton Doyle. What is the latest with Milton Doyle?
So it still feels like there's just a back and forth with the JackJumpers, and Pete and I have spoken about this a lot. It just doesn't feel like there's a world where they don't bring him back. I remember the last time Milton Doyle was a free agent, and it seemed like a deal would inevitably get done with the JackJumpers, and it ultimately did. That feels like the case this time around as well. I just don't see a world where they don't want him back, and I don't see a world where he doesn't want to go back. From what I understand, he'd love to stay in Australia. So again, we're just keeping an eye on that one. It feels like it will get done, and there is mutual interest in that happening.
It does seem like, again, we talk about it being part of the furniture, right? What Milton Doyle, what they're trying to bring there. Again, I wrote a piece about how important it is to roll over with continuity, with key pieces of understanding what the Hawks did. They had 9 players return from falling short in the semi-finals, managed to go win a championship. But with Matthew Dellavedova and Flynn Cameron leaving Melbourne United, there was links there for them being interested. We saw that reported a month ago. I wouldn't be surprised if that now ramps up a little bit more. If that ramps up and says, hey, I know you're probably in deep discussions with the JackJumpers, but if you were to make a move, what's it going to take? You could see him slot alongside Shea Ili, Chris Goulding. He can handle the rock if he needs to. He can go up to the 3 spot and defend the 3 if he has to as well. With everything that's happened with Melbourne United missing or losing some key places in the recent weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if the phone gets picked up soon.
That's an interesting one to watch, I think, Milton Doyle, of what happens there. To Kai, our next question from social media. I wonder whether the answer to this question was different now to perhaps what it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. Kai asks, will Keanu Pinder come back to Cairns? Now, I don't necessarily know that Keanu Pinder is coming back to Cairns, Pete and Olgun, but for those playing along at home, he was in China for a very short amount of time, was cut after just a few games, and it was maybe a bit of a reminder to Keanu of how cutthroat world basketball is. With all of that in mind, the grass isn't always greener. Do you think Keanu might be reconsidering the NBL for next season?
From the last information I heard, probably not. I keep being told that it's more than likely that we'll see Keanu Pinder overseas in some capacity. Yes, his most recent experience in China, it wasn't amazing, but he had an experience in Spain a couple seasons ago where he performed really, really well. And I think that left a really good taste in the mouths of a lot of European teams who looked at him and said, all right, we want to bring that guy in. So it does feel like he's almost been priced out of the NBL. The amount of money that he could gain is just not something that NBL teams are ready to pay right now. So it does feel like after these 2 seasons in Perth, feels like overseas is probably where Keanu Pinder is going to head.
Cairns is definitely not going to happen. Just the price alone is just definitely not going to happen to get him back there. It'd be great to see him back there. We know he thrived there under Adam Ford, won back-to-back most improved players. But again, being at 5 spot, you look around the rest of the league, there's only a couple of teams that need to fill that starting 5 spot. Isaac Humphries is in Adelaide, Geordie Hunter. Well, Sam Froling, obviously his Achilles injury, but Lockie Orbrick, what happens to him in the draft? Tyrell Harrison. There's only a couple of teams. I don't think the Sydney Kings would be going down that path. We know where they're going with their roster and spend as well. So I don't see it eventuating. But again, never say never. It can be a long off season for some teams.
This is a question from Corky that I'm going to need to read because it's quite detailed. I'm a long-suffering Bullets fan here. What is the state of play with the Bullets' ability to spend money on imports for the season? There was a time a few years ago where they couldn't spend as much as other teams. Is that still the case? And do the Bullets have a war chest?
I don't think the Bullets have a war chest. And I say that when looking at the cash and cap spends over the past couple of seasons. I've been scouring through, this past season's numbers, and I look at the Bullets, and they're one of a few teams that didn't even meet the salary floor. So the salary cap floor. So they haven't been spending a ton of money, and it doesn't seem like they're going to go and overspend. They're not like a Perth Wildcats or a Melbourne United or a Tasmania JackJumpers or a Sydney Kings that's willing to spend a ton of cash on these players. So it seems like they're going to continue with the level of imports they've gone with in the past. Casey Prather was one who I think they spent up for to retain this offseason. But it seems like they'll go a similar direction as far as like the quality of player that they did with the James Bateman and Keandre Cook. And again, it's just about making sure that those guys are in there and that they're healthy. And then you can ideally maximize Tyrell Harrison and Mitch Norton. You have Sam McDaniel back. So they have the foundation of a really solid team. It feels like they'll go down a really similar tack as far as the imports go to last season.
What is the most important position on the depth chart for Brisbane to fill, Pete? If they're going to make a splash anywhere, where is it?
Well, they're going to make. I mean, we saw Casey Prather probably play more of a power forward spot than we'd seen in the years gone by, with obviously coming back from the injury. If that's what they want to start him at the 4, then you have to go out there and potentially really go and get that impact 3-man. So I'm okay with the Mitch Norton running the show. I think he's proven that he can do that time and time again. Sam McDaniel, I think we keep forgetting what level he can play. I only played the 1 game before sitting out the rest of the season, so you can slot him back there in the 2. But it's interesting to hear the money side of things, and not meeting the salary floor, where you've got a team that was going after Matthew Dellavedova, which wouldn't have been cheap. But obviously you can marquee that. But obviously there was whispers around potentially Bryce Cotton. There'll be some pieces around. Again, I think they'll probably play the slower game as well, understanding that with Bateman and Keandre Cook, that if that neutral interest is there, it doesn't have to be pulling the trigger straight away. But Casey Prather for sure got a pay rise, and a well-deserved pay rise, because he was, and Olgun can allude to or correct me, but I believe one of, if not the lowest paid import in the league last season, based on what he was coming off with 2 significant injuries, had to accept that and bet on himself. But I can guarantee he won't be the lowest paid import next season.
Yeah, so from when I looked at the numbers, it was Casey Prather and Craig Sword, sort of the 2 lowest paid imports of last season. So he's obviously, there's a big uptick in his contract this coming season. When we speak about those salaries, I look at the Perth Wildcats, right? They led the league in cash spend, right? I'm doing the calculations right now. They're going to finish at the top of the cash spend from last season. And so when we talk about having to overpay for a marquee player, that's something that they're not against doing. They will overpay. They'll overpay for that marquee. Designate that person a marquee so the cap spend is less. So they're not afraid to do that. And when we speak about Keanu Pinder, this isn't reporting, but this is just something that's crossed my mind of a team that was interested in him a few years ago that may be able to use him at the 4 spot. What about the Illawarra Hawks? They're a team that they'll probably look for a replacement of some sort to Darius Days. And Keanu Pinder is someone who can play the 4 spot, and you can pay a lot of money for him and marquee him. The Illawarra Hawks are a team that they're not afraid to spend. They just don't want to go over the cap. And if they can bring in a marquee instead of an import, that helps their cause as far as spending a ton of money and not having to pay any tax. And Keanu Pinder is someone who they were interested in a few seasons ago before he signed with Perth. They were a team that were really hot on him. I haven't heard anything this offseason as far as them wanting him or even them being able to afford him. But they are positioned to bring in someone like that if they don't go the import direction.
Did you see the light bulb go off in his head then?
Well, it makes sense though when you think
Mid-sentence?
about. So obviously, Lockie Albury declaring for the draft. We're uncertain what happens with him in the future. Is there going to be picked up? Is there a two-way opportunity? Sam Frolin's not going to be ready to go at the start of the season. So you have a guy who could hold down the 5 spot very easily until you get the reinforcements back of Sam Froling or whatever happens with Lockie Albury. That'll be a fascinating one to watch.
Couple of quick ones before we finish off. One for you, Olgun, from Denver. Where are we at with Sunday Dech? As a Brisbane fan, I'd love to see him up here, but also think that Perth could be a good fit.
Yeah, so Perth is a team that has recently reached out to Sunday Dech, and they like the idea of bringing him in. Again, they may have to overpay for someone like Sunday Dech, but there are other teams around the league who are sort of just waiting. You know, Sunday Dech wants a certain amount of money, and right now it sounds like a lot of teams are just not quite willing to pay up to it. The Brisbane Bullets are a team that are involved. The Southeast Melbourne Phoenix have shown some interest too. The 36ers had some interest initially, but they weren't willing to meet the number, and then they got Flynn Cameron in, and so they effectively replaced Sunday with Flynn. So the Perth Wildcats are a team that are looking at Sunday Dech really closely right now. And when you look at the rest of the market, that's almost a piece they have to get. Obviously, he's a local kid. Bringing him home would be great, but you look at impact players remaining in free agency who could be part of an 8 or 9 man playoff rotation. Sunday Dech is one of the only names remaining who I think slots into that, and he's someone who you can start and you really don't lose too much. You look at the Illawarra Hawks starting Yanni Uluc. You can start these sort of connective defensive pieces, and so there are teams interested. The Bullets are one of them. The Phoenix are another, but the Wildcats recently reached out, and I think it's one that they really have to get done.
It seems like they'll be able to afford him. He's got a big price tag, Sunday Dech. He was on a big deal with the Adelaide 36ers. We know what he's capable of at his very best with the opportunity there. But then you can start to see the Wildcats take shape. If they go and get that Sunday Dech, you can start him at the 2. Yep. If you bring back Dylan Windler 3, Doolittle the 4, then you've got your bookends which can make or break your season. You go out there and land a marquee JLA Yanni Wetzell 5 type and a dynamic import 1. All of a sudden, you're looking very, very good from where I understand the concerns right now. But if you get that done, that's a making of a team that understands with 2 key imports who are here this year and saw how the league has played and how to have success in Windler and Doolittle. To go and make that splash elsewhere, all of a sudden that starting 5 would be very strong.
Lastly, from Brendan, can the New Zealand Breakers retain Mojave King and or Jonah Bolden?
As of now, it doesn't seem like it. Right now, the smoke with both of those guys is that they're more than likely going to explore their options outside of the NBL. Mojave King, I think there's the potential NBA or NBA adjacent, perhaps G League options that will be on the table for him that he may explore. And Jonah Bolden is one who has interest from across international basketball. So as of right now, it doesn't feel like either of them will be returning to New Zealand.
So that right there is a very comprehensive look of everything that is going on through free agency right now. Massive thanks again to all of you fans for watching this show and for sending through your questions. We'll get back to some more of these next week as well as news happens. But now we're starting to gain a bit of momentum now, aren't we, Pete? We've got the Matthew Dellavedova piece of the puzzle. We told you right from the start that as soon as he makes his decision, it will be a domino for others, and it feels like things are starting to roll.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of names on teams' whiteboards, and we spoke about this with Marketplace episode 1 2 months ago, that these conversations start years in advance with GMs and coaches looking who's off contract when, and I know it was a slow opening to free agency where some of the fans were like, there was no signings. I prefer it this way because it brings us in every single week to talk about new signings, to talk about where teams are placed. We had 15 signings or whatever it was in day 1 last year, and then it went quiet for a bit. It doesn't seem like we're going to have a quiet period, which is perfect.
Olgun, we've heard your phone going off while we've been recording this, so we've got to let you go. But the next few days and leading into next week as we get set towards Easter might unlock a few things.
Yeah, we were waiting for those Delhi, Flynn Cameron dominoes to fall. Now we're keeping a really close eye on Krslovic and keep a really close eye on United for that one. But you were waiting for Sunday Dech and David Aquera and some of these guys to fall, and then we'll see what other new players might enter the fray. Angus Brandt is someone who has a ton of interest. Tom Wilson is getting some interest now. Some returning college players. Tane Murray is someone that we should keep an eye on. So a lot of these, the next dominoes feels like a Sunday Dech, David Aquera, McQuatch Malawatch situation. And from then on, I think we'll continue to see that avalanche of signings.
That's someone who wants to get another pay for another show next week. You can't drop Angus Brandt right at the end of the show.
What is going on with Angus Brandt, just quickly?
Well, we speak about teams wanting backup bigs and guys who can come in who are reliable and who are good locker room guys, and Angus Brandt fits the bill. Yes, he's a little bit older. He's been playing in Division 2 Japan, but he's someone who a lot of teams are looking at. Look at the Brisbane Bullets. The Sydney Kings asked the question of him. There are a lot of teams who need that backup big spot. Angus Brandt is someone who's flagged that he's willing to return home, so keep an eye on that one. That
is, in soap opera, that's a tease to join us next week. That's nice by Olgun on the way out. Thanks for joining us on The Marketplace. Don't forget nbl.com.au to stay up to date with all the latest news and information during free agency. Follow Olgun and Pete on social media as well, and we'll catch you next time.